Dean accused himself. He didn't even show up, didn't he?
Go ahead. Right. And I think he'd be good. Oh, unless he sent it to Crystal.
What's that? Good. How about yourself? Good. A little better than yesterday. Better. It's a little better. Still got a ways to go. I'm happy.
There we go.
How are you doing?
We're still waiting on Greg. Your call. Okay.
We're currently missing our planning chair. I think somebody just went to look down the hall to see if he is available. Otherwise, we'll move forward with the vice chair. So if you just bear with us a second, thank you. Minneapolis this morning. Okay. If he comes, we'll just adjust to that, but, okay. Well, good afternoon. I will call this meeting of the Planning Commission for December 17th to order. And we'll look at roll call.
Okay. Commissioner Baffa,
Here.
Commissioner Eisenhower,
Here.
Commissioner Freiberger, Commissioner Gilmore,
Here.
Commissioner Good,
Here.
Commissioner Jackson,
Here.
Commissioner Lang,
Here.
Commissioner Olson,
Here.
Chairman Lankowitz.
So the next thing on the agenda is confirmation that the Kansas Open Meeting Act required notice has been properly provided.
It has.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll look at approving last meeting's minutes, the December 3rd minutes.
I move that we approve the minutes.
Seconded.
Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposing say no. Okay, it looks like we just have one item on the agenda. There's no public hearing items, just an administrative item, which is further consideration of the motion made at the October 15, 2019 Planning Commission meeting to postpone consideration of a replat request, number PO8-2B, and recommend a moratorium on any new building permits in the Grand Prairie addition until a code-compliant plan for an emergency access road connecting Markley Road and Bentgrass Drive that meets the requirements of the Salina Department is in place. And then this is postponed from the December 3rd, 2019 meeting. So were we going to hear from staff first? Turn it over to you?
That would be great. Thank you,
okay.
Madam Vice Chair. I think it's important to recognize that there are two issues I want to kind of separate out tonight. There is the actual replat, as you mentioned, of P08-2B. Action on that plat is not occurring tonight. There was a motion made back in October for a moratorium on any new building permits in Grand Prairie Addition until a code-compliant plan for emergency access roads connecting Markley and Bentgrass that met Salina Fire Department standards was in place. Following those meetings, we've had further conversation with the fire department to better understand what is code compliant. Is this road code compliant? They have staff here that is available to speak tonight to that. Staff has held on to the moratorium request based on what we heard from the fire department. We would like you to hear more of that information tonight. If still after this additional information you think it's necessary to move forward to the moratorium, staff would then move that forward to the next available city commission meeting. A little bit of background just for folks that are maybe new to this and some reminders. This property, the final phase contains 7.73 acres and is bordered by the Salina Municipal Golf Course to the west, north, and east. It's kind of a bit of a peninsula through there. The property as a whole has been developed through 3 different phases. Phase 1 of 34 lots, Phase 2 of 17 lots, and then this being Phase 3, which is the proposed replat. There is a Phase 3 already approved that would create 19 new lots. What the developers brought back and what spurred on this platting request, or this replat request, is to make smaller lots and more of them. So that's kind of how we got to this point. The project was originally started in 2007, or the development of this subdivision was started in 2007. Through 2008, and really all the way into the end of that year, almost 2009, there was discussion about how to make this work based on the municipal golf course being there and trying to get the right easements and the right layout. By December of '08, the Planning Commission did approve a preliminary plat for the subdivision, and then began going through the conditions that were placed on the preliminary plat to move it into final plat stage. That then, after going through final plat, was moved to the City Commission. By May of '09, the City Commission approved a motion authorizing the signing of the plat along with the additional easements for the golf course, dealing with maintenance and things like that. In '06, the Phase 1 portion, or I'm sorry, 2016, the Phase 1 portion of Grand Prairie was primarily built out, and so they started moving into Phase 2. And that brings us into 2019. Phase 2 is primarily built out. They're ready to move forward with Phase 3. The developer brought in a request via application PDD 19-1 and P08-2B, and that was in front of you, the City or Planning Commission, on September 3rd of 2019. And that was a planned development district request, basically to have smaller lots than what was originally proposed for Phase 3. That would have brought down what was originally 19 lots at a 100-foot width, and it would increase those to 36 lots with a 50-foot width. After further consideration following that Planning Commission meeting and concerns from the community about the size of those lots, number of lots, the developer came back and withdrew their PDD request and brought forward a replat request that would have created 30 new lots instead of 19 with a 60-foot width, which is currently allowed by subdivision regulations rather than the 50-foot, which would have needed additional exceptions. At that meeting on 10/15/19, where the new replat request was brought forward, there were several comments via the public related to the emergency access road, the safety of that road. several comments related to what the fire department did or did not say. There was also concerns related to the Parks and Rec department via the golf course and their objection to this development as a whole and this Phase 3. There were also concerns about stormwater runoff. There is a joint detention agreement with Mariposa, and so concerns about whether the drainage system would be able to handle these new and additional lots being proposed. So one of the things that we brought forward this evening is we have staff from the fire marshal's office here. We have the city engineer along with additional engineering staff to discuss the drainage concerns. We have staff from Parks and Rec to discuss the official, what does the golf course have to say about this development, along with, of course, community development staff to speak on this issue. We also have the city attorney here if there are any other questions related to some legal concerns as they may come up. At this point, I would like to relinquish the rest of my staff report time and ask the various departments to speak to the attachments that they have in the packets. You would have seen in the packet that was available for the public, there was a memo from the city engineer, a memo from Parks and Recreation Director, and a memo from the fire marshal. I would suggest we start with the fire marshal and discuss that letter. Primary concerns, as highlighted in the packet and the staff report, were related to the fire access road and the requirement for number of access points and also the condition and the stability of that road.
Thank you, Ms. Driscoll. And then everyone that approaches the podium tonight, we would ask that you state your name and address. And then with city staff, would they state their city or where they are?
They
the department
state their
that they're-
position and title with the city.
Okay, but otherwise, if you're from the public, we would like your home address. So please state your name.
I'm Troy Long. I'm the fire marshal with the Salina Fire Department. So I put together a memo. I can read it to you. I can explain it to you, whichever you would prefer.
General explanation.
So just a general explanation to give you the idea is, so the original plat with the emergency access road was originally submitted and reviewed and approved by Fire Marshal Roger Williams back in, I believe, 2008. It had been kind of a silent issue for at least me. I took office about 2.5 years ago. About 6 months ago, maybe 8 months ago, Dean Andrew, the city planner, sat down with Sean Pelcher and I to go over what potentially this new plat was, and that was when the new plat was submitted with the additional lots. Our biggest concerns with the new plat was setbacks, having enough space between the houses, things like that. At that time, we also reviewed the emergency access road that has already been designed, was submitted with the original plans with the original plat. We reviewed that. Everything is in place. I believe there was some misunderstanding about emergency access and how that is all played out. I feel like I addressed this fairly well in here. Exception number 2 in the International Fire Code. Now, this would not have been the code that would have been adopted back when this plat was first submitted. However, if you go, I went as far back as 2000 International Fire Code, and they come out with a new code set every 3 years. This code, exception number 2, has yet to change. It has stayed consistent. And that simply says the number of dwelling units on a single fire apparatus road shall not be increased unless the fire apparatus road will connect with future development as determined by the fire code official. So we use the International Fire Code. We also have what's called a commentary. And if you go to the commentary, it kind of gives a little more explanation in regards to what we're looking at as far as future building. Exception number 2, and this is just kind of the code written in layman language. Exception number 2 requires approval by the fire code official anytime a new house is constructed on an existing access road. Once the maximum number of dwelling units allowed by this section has been reached, no further development may occur unless the fire code official determines that there will be a future road connection that will prevent the creation of excess dead-end situation with no means of apparatus turnaround. Before I go any further beyond this, I would like to mention that the road design that is currently in place, I believe there are several turnarounds in that design currently. So you can see there's 2. Kind of the circle there as you go in on the left, and then going further into the access, there's a turnaround there on the right.
Can you hold up and point those out again with the?
Sure. So there is the first turnaround, and there is the second turnaround, and then this cul-de-sac here would give us access for a third turnaround, and that's just before Phase 3 starts. To continue, such determination by the fire code official should consider the phase development of an individual project or adjacent projects. Cities all over the country build housing developments like this with future access going down the road. And so, because we know that the initial plat, the second plat, the third plat now, we see that emergency access road, it has been designed, it is in place. There's currently no reason to put that emergency access in at this point. If you could go to where, so the Phase 3 here, this portion of the road, if you see that little dog leg going off of there, that's our emergency access road. So if we had that emergency access road in there today, it wouldn't do us any good because it would just go to an open field. And so, as I said in my memo, the second page, so as to the Grand Prairie development, it has always been planned that prior to any vertical construction in Phase 3, an approved public street, bent grass, with utilities would need to be completed, as well as the construction of the designed emergency access road across the golf course. Bent grass needs to be extended to its north terminus to allow the emergency access road to connect to the subdivision. And so this is the portion of the road that isn't currently built, and that's Phase 3. What they're showing here, that's actually what's already existing. Is that correct, Dustin? I don't think that's...
This is the easement that was dedicated in 2008 as part of the approval of the plat. And so what this is just a quick explanation, is this is an aerial photo with the subdivision plat superimposed on it, along with all of the dedicated easements that were necessary in order to get the subdivision utilities, such as sanitary sewer and water and things like that. So this is actually the easement that has been dedicated. Now it matches the trail path that's out there that was more prominent when the area was used to shoot off fireworks, but that shows the area where the proposed access road would be constructed for emergency purposes.
And so, just to finish, Bent Grass Drive needs to be extended to its north terminus to allow the emergency access road to connect to the subdivision. until Phase 3 is built, there would be no public street in place for the emergency access road to tie into. So-
Thank you. And we can ask questions now, right? of
Yeah, you can
staff?
ask staff
Okay.
questions.
So, does anyone have questions for the fire marshal?
Yes, so without a secondary emergency access road, there should be no more homes built in the subdivision then. Is that correct? Is that what you're saying?
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is they can build roads, I mean, they can build houses until they get to Phase 3. And when they start Phase 3, obviously, he's not going to start building houses until he has a road in there. Well, they won't be able to do any vertical construction until the road of Phase 3 is built and the emergency access road ties into that.
So for instance, we would, once the plat is approved, that then lets the subdividing move forward, that lets them apply for special assessments if they want to do so. They then construct the utilities and the road, and then we get to the building permit part. As part of the plat, you'd have a requirement that this emergency access road would need to be built. No building permit could be issued until that access was there. So when we say vertical construction, you can put in utilities, you can put in road, but you're not building any houses until that emergency access road is built for Phase 3. But Phase 2 can fill out with houses.
But isn't there a 30 lot maximum?
So going back to the International Fire Code, it says the number of dwelling units on a single fire apparatus road shall not be increased unless fire apparatus access roads will connect to future development as determined by the fire code official. So the intent is for Phase 2 to connect to Phase 3, and Phase 3 will allow our access road to come in then.
But what about the 30 dwelling units?
So there's two exceptions to that code. So the code says 1 and 2 family dwelling, residential dwelling units, developments of 1 and 2 family dwelling units where the number of dwelling units exceeds 30 shall provide with 2 separate and approved apparatus access roads, and they shall meet the requirements of D 104.3. The next thing underneath that is exceptions. So exception number 1 says is if every house in that addition has a sprinkler system, then they can build more than 30. Exception number 2 says if there's going to be a future fire apparatus access road to tie into there, then they can go over that.
Any other questions for the fire marshal?
Yeah, just to make sure I understand, go back to the picture with the turnarounds. So what you're currently saying is because of the number of lots that are currently in there, we've got the turnaround on the left-hand side, the one on the right-hand side. Based on these total number of lots that are in here, they're going to exceed our 30, and because the next phase up above, because you have an access road pulled into it, then all of that meets fire code. The access road doesn't have to be completed until you build that road because it's not going to drop into anything.
Correct.
And what you're saying is the way this is currently set up with our current fire equipment on those turnarounds, all of that gives you access that you don't have an issue getting in or getting out. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
This is actually above and beyond what we would normally see with these turns in there. We don't generally see, it's normally just a road that's whatever the requirement is. I mean, 60 feet or whatever.
Okay. And then the cul-de-sacs on the other parts, the Phase 1, the 2 cul-de-sacs that are in there,
That are in there.
those exceed or meet what the requirement is then?
Yeah, they would be designed to what the fire department requires as a turning radius.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yes, I do. Should Phase 3 be developed, what kind of road would be acceptable to the fire department?
So the minimum requirement is a road that's at least 20 foot wide. It has to be able to withstand 75,000 pounds, which is the heaviest of our heavy fire trucks, and then has to have a clear height of, I believe it's 13.6, and that's just off the top of my head. I don't have that in front of me. I'm sorry.
Up on the screen right now is the design that came along with the final approval of the plat from the developer, recognizing the road would need to be installed. So that design to handle the fire requirements has been considered and would be made appropriate in order for that emergency access road to be built.
Okay, so I assume that road would be hard surfaced, concrete, asphalt?
From the design I've seen, some of it is, and some of it is some sort of paver that they use in areas that they can have grass grow in the center of it. I'm not an engineer, so I try not to tell people how to design roads, but if an engineer put their stamp on it and said, hey, this is designed to withstand 75,000 pounds, I have to take that for what it is.
And I'd like to see those requirements for grass paver.
We can, and these original designs that were brought forward when the plat was initially approved does indicate some grass pavers in certain areas and other materials used there. I mean, it has been a few years since that was last looked at, but, I mean, I would assume the developer would be working with their engineers to, I mean, they look at a variety of different materials in order to meet the fire department's requirements for handling the weight and width.
One last question.
Sure.
So it's all been tied into the access road on Phase 3. Say Phase 3 doesn't ever get developed out. Is there still an issue with access currently for you because of the 30 and future development? So say that developer decides we're not going to do Phase 3. Are we still good with the way it currently sits?
So I would say if Phase 3 were not going to be built, we would have to at that point say, we've reached our 30th house, we have to have if we go over that 30 house limit, we would have to have a secondary means of egress, and something would have to be provided to get us in there based on the code.
Okay. So how many houses are currently in there?
$28. I think there's 28.
28?
28 seems to be the number said, but I do not know off the top of my head.
I've heard that number.
Okay, so if there were 2 more houses built on the current development, Phase 3 doesn't go through, then you have to have an access road before the 30th could be built?
31st.
31st.
Yeah.
Okay. And at that point, where would that access road come into?
I assume we would have, being the developer has this property already, he would have to go forth with, I'm assuming this street would not become like a public street. It would get marked off, and it would be 20 foot wide and have that same 75,000 pound limit, and would still have to come across the golf course. Because we have to have that secondary means of egress if you go over that 31.
Okay.
And we base our decision off of plans that are submitted based on, this is Phase 3, and that includes our access road.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir.
Madam Vice Chair, I would suggest we next talk with Parks and Recreation.
Sounds good. Follows our agenda.
Chris Cotton, Director of Parks and Rec, is here to speak to this issue. As I mentioned, you'll see there was a previous letter from Steve Snyder, former Director of Parks and Rec, dated December 15th, 2008, in the packet, along with some additional materials, and we'll let Chris take it from there.
Good afternoon. I've met with Dean and with Dustin on this matter. I see no reason to overturn what Steve Snyder agreed to several years ago. As long as it's not a daily driver road, as long as it's emergency access only, we're not opposed to it. I have read the plans. I would prefer it to be the grass pavers in more of a ag line base like they use in state trails as opposed to asphalt millings, which is what I read the plans. Those are kind of unsightly, and I think it would be a detractor to our beautiful golf course. But other than that, I see no reason to be opposed to it.
Does anyone have questions?
Yes. Have you polled any golfers?
I have not. Mike Hargrave is here. Mike can speak to that.
And please state your name. Thank you.
I'm the manager of the municipal golf course. We have not done any type of formal survey or anything. In just talking with a number of our golfers, they don't have any issue with the emergency access road being put in there. I think there was probably some talk before this was really discussed and details about it were made public that some people were thinking, oh, this is going to be a public access road. I mean, people that live in Phase 3 are going to be driving through your golf course. And that is not accurate. It would be an emergency access road only. As I understand, grass pavers, where golfers would be teeing off or playing, they would see grass, basically. I mean, they're going to be able to tell that that's an access road, but it's not going to look like a concrete road. So what we have received from just comments from our golfers is, you know, they don't have any issue with an emergency access road being put in there.
Do you have any methods of polling?
We do. We could create a survey, absolutely, and send it to our email base. We could do that.
I guess in full disclosure, I polled a golfer that I'm married to, and he had no problems with it either.
Right now, isn't there some drainage problems that exist coming off those hills?
I really cannot speak to that. I know that the issues that I have been made aware of are more outside of this area that are a detention pond. But again, I cannot really expertly speak about that. I just do know that as I've seen the construction of this proposed access road, again, as Mr. Cotton has stated and our previous Parks and Rec director, we don't have any issues with that road going in as it is designed.
And then Commissioner Baffa, we do have the city engineer here, so we can definitely get to drainage questions.
Okay, any other questions for Parks and Rec or the golf manager? If not, thank you for coming.
Great. Madam Vice Chair, I would then next ask representation from city's engineering department. I believe Dan Stack, city engineer, is here to speak to stormwater runoff and other drainage-related issues.
Great, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Madam. And Commissioners. Let's see, this subdivision initially in the late 2000s went through a lot of drainage back and forth, I guess, with this pond that exists for the subdivision for Grand Prairie. There was 2 ponds put in, one on each side of the road, and basically our drainage criteria require that any increased development, any intensity in development, that the post-development, anything after these things are developed, that runoff has to be the same as before it was developed. So in general, that's kind of how drainage criteria work, and so then they have to basically put in a pond to hold the water back, and then it drains at the same rate or better as before. And so in the case of this subdivision, they built a couple of ponds and actually decreased the runoff a little bit with their pre versus post based on the size of the ponds and the size of the pipes. They had a decrease of 13% from the pre-development to the post-development runoff. Now, granted, this all drains down the hill into the golf course and then ultimately into Mariposa Pond and then into the Smoky Hill River. So the idea, though, is to keep the runoff similar or less than before, or the same as before, basically, is the criteria. They reduced it enough to where basically this intensity in use going from 19 to 30 lots does not impact it enough to cause it to be any, it does increase it some, I mean, for sure, but it's still well within the 13% reduction they had before.
Actually, on the screen, you'll see Mr. Stack's letter noting that the margin referenced above was 13%, and based on the current replat and the number of proposed lots, staff calculated this is a 2.9% increase that would affect that 13% margin, then bringing it down to, what, 11.9%? So still well within that range. Am I understanding that correctly, Dan?
Yeah, about 10%, 13 to 10.
Mr. Stack, when you say runoff, are you talking about after the runoff that exits the retention ponds?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. What about the, let's just say a runoff from one driveway? How does it get to the pond?
Oh, the street basically takes a lot of the runoff in these properties, and then it goes into storm sewer system, and then it either goes across the pond, across the golf course in a couple of areas, or it goes into the ponds, depending on where you're at in the topography. Let's see if they have the map. Do you have a? Yeah. I can,
And you don't see that running across the golf course as a hindrance to golfers?
Nope. No, it's kind of been doing that since the hills have been there forever, so it's been happening for a long time, and so you try to minimize the speed of the water, and basically they try to keep the same amount of water ultimately coming off this development as there was before, and that's what they've done. Here's the two ponds. And so this area actually decreases water coming through here. There's water that comes off this side over here and water that comes off over here. Oh, there you go. Yeah, right in here is another area where water comes off, but any increase in those areas is then decreased ultimately from the ponds and from the other areas. So it has to be a net same, basically, a net zero increase, and they actually had a net decrease. So we haven't seen any issues thus far that we know of.
Any other questions for Mr. Stack?
Okay.
If not, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Madam Vice Chair, at this time, I will wrap up the formal staff report. City staff from all the various departments will remain here. I think it was the intention of this is to take public comment, and then following the conclusion of public comment, any questions that you would like to ask staff further or get greater clarification on, we would be available to do that. Just concluding the staff report and the item that's in front of you. Staff is formally requesting that the Planning Commission reconsider its desire to move forward with the moratorium based on the information you hear tonight. If you would like us to further that request, then you would stay the motion you've already made. But if you think that moratorium is no longer required, then that you would then withdraw that motion and give staff on how you would like to move direction forward.
Okay, thank you. So at this time, we will open it up to public comment. And as a reminder, state your name and your home address. And we will just take comments one after another. We won't give feedback from up here, or won't even clarify from what I understand. We'll just listen to your comments, and then we'll have an opportunity to follow up with staff once we hear, if we have additional questions after hearing your comments. So please feel free to come to the mic.
Afternoon. Dr. Justin Hankey, 1322 Bentgrass Drive.
I know you're having a 5-minute time limit. I've been deemed the representative for the neighborhood.
Yeah,
There's-
thanks for reminding me of that.
There's 15 of us here. I'm not going to take 15 times 5 minutes. So I'll try and get through things as fast as I can, and hopefully it's a quick meeting. So I wanted to start out by asking Mr. Cotton. No. Nope. Mr. Cotton's, where'd he go? He's gone? He's gone. Okay.
Maybe I can answer.
Yeah. Looking at Steve Snyder's letter, it said that it needs to be restored to a playable condition. Is the intention that golfers will be able to hit off of these areas?
Now, from what I understand, we're not going to answer questions right now, but the commissioners will keep track of these questions and can ask for clarification later. But just for efficiency,
Okay.
yeah, go ahead and take your 5 minutes,
Okay.
and then we'll hear from others.
I would doubt that if we can't hit off those areas, that golfers would be very concerned. You seem to be a golfer, Mr. Baffin. The other question I was going to ask was, is there 5 minutes if I'm speaking on behalf of 15 people?
There's nothing in the rules that says that as a community representative, you get an extended period of time. Am I correct, Greg? Yes.
So they'll come up and yield their time to me, and they'll just stand here next to me. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay.
It's their opportunity to speak.
Okay, perfect. I was going to ask Mr. Long, as the fire access road is designed, is it up to code? And then would he have approved the plans just like Roger Williams did in 0809? So to start out, I'd like to thank the Salina Media Connection. They helped me out with getting videos, keeping track of meetings, and just looking up information. I heard staff calling me a liar about meeting with the golf course and the fire department on the meeting after November 18th City Commission meeting. There are also reports in the staff report on October 15th that I had no one to corroborate what I was saying. To be clear, I don't appreciate this. I've been completely truthful with everything I've presented. I will admit I spoke vaguely about who I met with from the fire department. As I promised them, I would do my best to avoid saying their names. It's no secret that the city government has a culture of retribution if anyone goes against the grain, and I'll show this as I go along. When I was asked by Dean Andrew on October 15th who I met with, I was pretty clear with my statement.
Mr. Hankey is.
Sorry.
Mr. Hankey is who he spoke with at the Salina Fire Department, because I had a meeting with Troy Long, the fire marshal, to review these plans before this item came to the Planning Commission. I understand that, but okay. Troy is well aware. Okay.
It's kind of a good thing that the fire department did come out, because even with Mr. Andrew and Mr. Long reviewing these plans, they had no idea that the road did not exist. However, I was told on multiple occasions by the fire department that Mr. Long was updated and made aware that they came on the golf course and the road wasn't there. Here are the text exchanges between the fire department and myself, including a picture of them giving me the codes from the IFC manual. You guys are able to see these as soon as I'm done. Mr. Chuck Gary was a resident with me when the fire department came out to assess the road. Mr. Gary's going to come up and corroborate what I said, since that has been questioned by city staff, if he's willing. This will be part of my time.
Chuck Gary, 1318 Bentgrass Drive. On September 30th, I was with Dr. Hankey when we took 2 firemen out onto the golf course to access the emergency access path. One of them was filling in for the fire marshal because he was not available. After discussion, going down the path, we ended up at the entrance. We come in backwards, stopped at the entrance, and the 2 fire marshal guys that were with us stated they told us they would never use that pass under any circumstances because lacking an all-weather surface, couldn't identify the path coming off of Markley Road. They didn't think a fire truck could make the turns. The truck couldn't fit through the areas and the trees, and the pass was excessively long with multiple turns. They also told us that they would let Troy Long know about being out there with us on the access road and not being in place. They also told us prior administration used to approve things that should have never been approved. After they gave us the current fire codes, they were kind enough to remove an emergency safety lockbox on the back of my home that I had requested prior to this event. That's all I've got.
Thank you.
And that should have still been on my time. Keep in mind what the firefighter said to Mr. Gary and I about the paths in regards to length, turns, width, and reporting they wouldn't use a path they could not identify. They're honest guys, and obviously one of them fills in for the fire marshal, so he's very knowledgeable about the fire code. As to meeting with golf course staff, here's a text exchange I had with someone about meeting with Keith Leonard. He's the assistant pro. Went to the course today. Mike was out because of a personal day. I spoke with Keith Leonard, who has worked there for about 6 years. He said he didn't know anything of any road with concrete pavers other than that random gravel I pointed out in my presentation. I'm going back Monday when Mike is back to speak with him. He has worked there since the 90s, so he would be the guy to know. Because I would like to be respectful on people who do not want to go on the record and to save time, I will not play the recording I have proving I met with Mike. It also shows that he's saying the complete opposite now that he's spoken to his staff. I will make this recording available to you guys as soon as I'm done. And with all the process, if anything is needed from me to prove what I'm saying, I can provide it. Calls, text, whatever you need, just let me know. I'm going to run over some facts just like Ms. Driscoll did over what's happened, given there seems to be a lot of new people paying attention to this process. In 08-09, the Grand Prairie project was submitted and approved. The subdivision consisted of 70 lots on Larkspur and Bentgrass Drive, both cul-de-sacs. Part of the approval of the subdivision, residential R1 zoning, required the golf course to provide easement for an emergency access road from Markley Road to North Bentgrass Peninsula. Steve Snyder, the Parks and Rec Director, at the time was appointed to represent the City of Salina as a co-applicant in the process with Cornerstone Development. The access road was required to meet the fire code due to 2 separate emergency access roads being needed for the development with 30 or more homes per the fire code at the time. The easements were approved by Mr. Snyder. We've seen the path already. Mr. Snyder told the Planning Commission on March 18th, 2008, according to the transcript that you have been given by the city staff, that there are beefed up cart paths made for emergency vehicles. There's a gate off of Markley and they would just continue this path. There are no beefed up cart paths. There's no gate off of Markley. There's nothing to continue. Those cart paths consist of 10 feet of the 800 to 1,000 feet of the path needed for the emergency access road. Saying a few grass-type pavers is also very misleading. Grass-type pavers are not an all-weather surface, which I will discuss in a little bit. Also required for the approval of the subdivision was a legal agreement with compensation with Mariposa HOA for the drainage, which we know. Other interesting things from the May 4th, 09 city approval documents where the developer was granted significant variances in cul-de-sac lengths, which we will discuss in a little bit. At that time, it was also recommended that the neighborhood be a PDD instead of an R1 development, and that, of course, the splitting of lots was strictly prohibited. From that point, the neighborhood began building restrictions for HOA covenants. Everybody in the neighborhood followed. 28 homes with building permits currently, 25 are being inhabited. The developer recently decided to grant significant variances from the covenants that he didn't discuss with the residents. On August 13th, 2019, the developer submitted a request to rezone Phase 3 of Grand Prairie to go from 18 R1 or 19 R1 residential lots to 36 PDD lots. It was blatantly obvious to everyone on September 3rd that Dean Andrew was allowing the developer to split lots under the guise of rezoning to a PDD status. On September 3rd, as you know, numerous residents disputed the application. To split lots, residents reported concerns about the well-being of the golf course, individual property rights, property values, HOA covenants, and inconsistent details regarding the rezoning plan.
Mark Bolin, 2203 Applewood Lane, presently building a house at 1338 Bentgrass.
Residents reported concerns about the well-being of the golf course. Just said, due to the application having a complete lack of details regarding materials, dimensions of the homes, as you pointed out, and a sideways video the developer took on his phone while driving through a neighborhood in Derby, Kansas, the application was denied until further details were provided. During that meeting, Dean Andrew discussed the emergency access road being in place. It was clearly stated by Mr. Andrew that the golf course had concrete pavers. They had been installed across the golf course. A road is there and consists of these concrete pavers. We know it works because it's used regularly. We know that's a lie now. Mr. Andrew was quoted in the Salina Journal saying, "Even when I read the minutes and watch, I can't tell whether I inferred it or gave it the impression. But it seems I led them to believe the road was already in place as an emergency access road. I was under the impression that the access road was going to be built because design plans for the road were in phase 1. Remember, the design plans were in phase 1 for this road. An update on the Salina Journal website regarding the staff mistake that would postpone Grand Prairie on December 3rd reported Mr. Andrew admitted Sunday that he may have led commissioners to believe the emergency access road was already in place. So he admitted it in that update. Dean Andrew also discussed during the September 3rd meeting the drainage issues and how Mariposa Retention Pond would be used for the drainage across the golf course. There was no mention of the legal agreement between the two parties of Cornerstone and HOA. You guys repeatedly say you don't enforce covenants. It just seems funny that you're going to override a legal agreement between these two parties without informing the Mariposa HOA. Also discussed was the fact that the applications being processed had to have up-to-date taxes. The developer did not have these in place. It seems confusing to all of us why the application would still be allowed to be processed and go forward without these being in place. It seems to be quite a bias towards the developer. Following the September 3rd meeting, we were supposed to receive information from the developer regarding the PDD details. To no surprises, the application was withdrawn. It would be a replat of Phase 3, thus splitting lots from 19 to 30 instead of 36, due to it fitting the minimum requirements for the R1 developments. The replat application was presented by Dean Andrew on October 15th at the City Planning Commission. The application was presented for approximately 35 minutes with no new mention of any new knowledge about the emergency access road being present or not present or up to fire code. The application was also presented as an administrative item, meaning the commission was not required to accept public comment. If it was not for Mrs. Good allowing the residents to speak, none of these issues would have been known. I then presented the lack of the existence of the emergency access road that was said to be functional. Upon questioning Mr. Andrew about this fact, he immediately changed the story from September 3rd meeting to there is a plan and easements in place, not even a rough idea about the concrete pavers, but the design specifications by a civil engineer, no assurance that the concrete pavers would be functional if they existed, but there is a pre-existing road in place, but it's a dirt path. Once again, huge change of information between the two meetings, and it did not seem truthful at the time. The details regarding the contract between Cornerstone Development and Mariposa HOA were presented by Mr. Mark Boland. Mariposa HOA were also present, and they are today as well. They were unaware of these changes until being informed by Mr. Boland. They were not pleased regarding the proposed changes and lack of notification, given the contract was based on the original number of lots. Mr. Andrew also stated on 2 separate occasions during this meeting that the above-mentioned fire codes were not required back in 0809. The packet I will provide later displays that this is completely false and all the same requirements are required as they are today with very little variation. After these presentations, a lot of public debate occurred, and eventually it was recommended a moratorium be in place on building permits in Grand Prairie. Following that meeting, I immediately left, called one of the original firemen that came out and assessed the emergency access path with Mr. Gary and I, and informed him that what had occurred. He said Mr. Long was aware, and they understood what had occurred. On October 21st, I had a meeting at the hospital where I met with one of the firemen that informed me that Dean Andrew went and spoke with the fire department following the October 15th meeting a day or two later and was extremely mad. I was also told at that time the emergency access road is going to be built no matter what anyone says because Mr. Andrew's in the spotlight. I have said multiple times during this process, I don't think things will be done honestly and appropriately by the city without public knowledge of this problem. For that reason, I reached out to a local reporter, Mr. Tim Unruh, who wrote the article that was in the Salina Journal on December 2nd. When he was trying to decide if he should write the article, he met with Troy Long, the fire marshal. Here's the text I got back from Tim on October 30th. I am just trying to nail down the details before pursuing a story. Apparently, Troy said the access road was built eons ago, so the FD, fire department, could access the golf course for the fireworks in July. I said, well, I have seen no evidence that the road exists, and he said it's probably been overgrown. As stated earlier by Dean Andrew on October 15th, when asking me who I had met with, he had met with Troy and reviewed all of these plans. So our fire marshal was stating the same lie that Dean Andrew was about the fire road being installed. Also keep in mind the original firefighters said.
Eunice Gary, 1318 Bent Grass Drive.
Also keep in mind what the original firefighters who came out said about not using a road they could not identify, like if the road was overgrown by grass. And once again, these texts are available for any of the commissioners to see after this meeting. On November 5th, the City Planning Commission meeting occurred. Towards the end of the meeting, Dean Andrew mentioned details regarding Grand Prairie, which prompted me to speak in the public forum portion and play the recordings from September 3rd and October 15th meeting, clearly displaying misinformation that we know to be a lie now. I also read the City Planning Commission transcript from March 18th, 2008, which I have already reviewed today by Steve Snyder, the Parks and Rec Director, that presented things that did not exist to the Planning Commission. After presenting, Dean Andrew reported that he misinformed the Commission and that he would be recusing himself from the involvement of the Grand Prairie project. Dean Andrew also stated he became aware between the September 3rd and October 15th Planning Commission meetings that the emergency access road did not exist.
So, that is correct. I will be recusing myself from any further involvement in the Grand Prairie project. And on September 3rd, I misinformed the Planning Commission that the road had been constructed as part of Phase 1. It had not been constructed as part of Phase 1. Between that hearing and the October 15th hearing, I learned that it was not constructed. The path is there. An emergency access easement has been granted by the City Commission across the golf course.
Given this new knowledge prior to October 15th meeting, you would have thought he would have let us know that it actually was not there and he would not have moved forward with the R1 replat application that was presented for 35 minutes before I got up and talked about it and displayed that the emergency access road was not installed. This is very concerning that a zoning administrator would move forward with an application without telling us of this new knowledge. It was also reported at the time that Dean Andrew was incorrectly informed about the existence of the emergency access road installed by the previous Fire Marshal Roger Williams.
Clarity on it, kind of what I'm getting is basically you acted on good faith with information that you thought was correct, and just somewhere along the line it just
Provided to me.
Sorry, I was getting a call.
Fire Marshal, who is now in Houston, Texas.
So it's, I guess, to put it bluntly, it's not your fault that
Roger Williams is the only person involved in this project that does not currently live in Salina, and he's also retired. Seems like a convenient person to blame. Does it really make any sense to say that the zoning administrator who issues building permits on all projects had no idea that the road was installed across a golf course, that he was later informed by the fire marshal that it was installed across the golf course? I'm not sure why it would be the fire marshal that would oversee the installation of this emergency access road across the golf course. On August 22nd, 2016, at the City Planning Commission meeting, while discussing special assessments regarding Phase 2 of Grand Prairie, minute 2:50 and 30 seconds of the meeting, Dean Andrews stated, quote, "There will eventually be a second way in via an emergency access road from Markley Road across the golf course to ensure a second way in." I would have played this video for you today, but the quality on YouTube is terrible. Please feel free to look it up. If you need the link, let me know. Roger Williams' day of retirement was on August 17th, 2017, according to the Salina Journal. So he would have had to install the road and inform him in between these time periods. Clearly, this is another lie. Following November 5th meeting, the Planning Commission seemed to acknowledge that there was a significant problem with what had occurred. For that reason, I reached out to the planning office to see if I could meet with Dean Andrew and his team to discuss the process moving forward. I wanted to make sure that everyone would try and work together to help correct this problem and make it clear that there was no intention to get anyone in trouble despite very concerning misinformation being presented. I was either disconnected or hung up on when the secretary forwarded me to Dean Andrews' office. I called back a couple times and later asked to speak with Dustin Hers, who answered and found a free time for me to meet with him and Dean. This occurred at 10 a.m. on November 7th. However, Dean Andrew was not present, and I met with Dustin Hers and Lauren Driscoll. This was not the most productive meeting, and it was made pretty clear to me that the emergency access road was going to be going through the golf course no matter what. One of the concerning things from this meeting was the influence that the city staff seemed to have on the fire department.
you know, that this is, I mean, if this is the plan moving forward, then we're probably going to stay on opposite sides and see what happens with just a lot of public debate.
Well, I guess,
which I don't think is beneficial.
No, but I think one of the things that has to get figured out is, you know, I need something from Parks and Rec on the record. Because this he said, she said kind of stuff.
It's ridiculous.
It's stupid.
Yeah, it's dumb. I agree 100%. And you know, when I have, you know, a fire department guy come talk to me, and it's not the fire marshal time because he's out of town, but it's the guy who fills in for the fire marshal, that creates.
Do you have that guy's name?
I have his first name. I can't ever spell his last name. Yeah, I can't ever spell his last name.
Lloyd Perez, 1308 Larkspur.
And that was the exchange, the text exchange I had that I still have.
Would you be able to provide me with that text exchange?
I can, but why do you need it now?
Well, one of the things is, again, it's not
helpful. It seems like you're going to get Joe in trouble.
Well, I am. Like,
why
I'm
would
not
Joe
going to
get in trouble providing
I am going to go talk to the fire.
would.
I don't think a fireman should get in trouble for responding to a concerned citizen and telling him nothing but accurate facts about the fire code just because it didn't match up with the city's agenda. These are the people that protect us while we sleep, and they should be treated as such. Other concerns from this meeting was the lack of transparency by the city, which I have mentioned multiple times.
units are a no-go because
It's not up to code.
because of the access.
Yeah.
For no other reason then.
What do you mean for no other reason?
Well, you said you're talking about investment.
Just what the city's invested in building a road and things like that.
Okay.
And just allowing the neighborhood to fill in and finish. At this point, we're on a moratorium. We're all frozen.
Moratorium?
We've reached the limit of how many houses can be built without a secondary access.
Sorry, when you say moratorium, it's a legal term, so I'm like...
It was deed storm, so...
So you've reached capacity in the neighborhood?
Yeah, not even, the moratorium was stated by you guys. I said in my presentation there can be 3 more homes, and then we're at capacity.
Okay.
Is it concerning to anyone else that Mr. Andrew and Mr. Hers didn't inform their boss about the moratorium and issues with this project 23 days after the fact? When would she have found out if I had not initiated the meeting and told her? And later, they still maintain that nothing had been done wrong.
But yeah, even on that.
It's already there, that's the issue. The easement's been executed, an easement is a sliver of rights, and that's...
And I'm going to go back to where I'm saying when I talked to Mike, there's irrigation there, and he's like, you can't build across that. We already have irrigation in place. And it goes back to how it was presented back then. I do. I'm sure there was an easement in place. I'm sure it was approved in 08. We know it was approved in 08.
So because the golf course installed irrigation underneath an easement that was already there, that's the developer's fault?
I don't think this is the developer's fault.
Okay.
This is an error that the city allowed.
From my seat looking at this, the error seems to be that this wasn't constructed when we thought it was. Other than that, I don't know what the error is.
You think they presented it well from that transcript what I read to the planning committee?
Well, I'm looking at this, the design, and you're adding pavers, and that's what these are in these locations.
I understand this part of how it was drawn up and the easements were in place. I'm talking about how it was presented and people really knowing what was being voted upon. They're largely dependent upon how you guys present it.
Sure. I guess I don't know.
But whether the road was built or not, I mean, understanding that an easement creates legal access somewhere, I mean, how did the planning commission not understand that?
Pretty easily when they said it was already being used and it was just a couple grass type pavers. When you talk about, putting a road through a fairway that, just like Bath was saying last time, are you really talking about putting a road through a fairway? That surprised him quite a bit.
But it's not a full, it's an emergency access road.
It needs to be a functional road. And I'm not talking about,
To meet
fire code.
specifications for fire code.
Yeah, right. That's a pretty
It
significant
doesn't
road at this
need to
point.
be paved, correct?
Well,
It can be done with grass, like GeoGrid or...
Yeah, that's what you would do along where you have a golf play.
And to be clear, the error I mentioned there was that what the city allowed was not irrigation on the golf course. The error was zoning this area to residential status since there's no way to create an acceptable secondary emergency access road. So despite everything that occurred, nothing had been done wrong. If nothing had been done wrong, I thought they would have notified everybody about the moratorium.
Notification.
So what do the people do now that own lots that can't build on them?
They wait.
Okay. Have they been notified?
Have they been notified?
That there's a moratorium or...
Well, I mean, if they've been involved in the public process, they have, because it was mentioned in the public hearing.
But otherwise they don't know.
Otherwise, they probably don't know.
Okay.
But I don't know that we've had anybody submit any building permits that we've had to inform either.
Shouldn't they be informed?
I know of a few that are informed just because of personal conversation, but that's something we could do, is look at the ownership list and send out letters.
Just a thought. I'm not trying to attack or anything like that. This is a bad scenario we need to try and fix it.
Jess Ryan, 1212 Bentgrass.
So they didn't inform their boss of the moratorium or citizens that had property that had been deemed unable to build on. This seems like an intention to keep things quiet. On November 18th, the City Commission meeting occurred. City Commissioners were finally updated that there was an issue with Grand Prairie. People should watch this meeting because the information provided to the Commissioners seems very downplayed. Commissioner Hodges astutely noted that there was something strange about the timeline and the process.
I didn't see back there. I don't mean to put you on the spot, Mr. Long, but no, I just basically my concern is process, and since this happened back in October, mid-October, I think it was like the 15th or something like that, when they recommended the moratorium.
Admittedly, there's been an unanticipated amount of conversation and issues raised. The recommendation of a moratorium is certainly out of the norm coming out of the Planning Commission, and as Ms. Driscoll described, there seemed to be a lot of conversation directed at the road where there wasn't real clear understanding of the discretion that was granted to the fire marshal at the outset of approving Grand Prairie, or the status at the time the recommendation for the moratorium was made. So staff's been trying to kind of track down all the questions and give definitive answers so the Planning Commission can make a more informed decision.
Would the city commissioners have ever even been informed if I had not initiated the meeting on November 7th? Over the Thanksgiving holiday weekend, I had seen that the Planning Commission packet did not include the information promised. I emailed Mr. Hers and Mrs. Driscoll twice in the morning prior to 8:30 on Monday, December 2nd, stating that multiple residents were wondering why there was no information in the packet. I was in communication with city staff throughout the day Monday, and here are the emails sent to Mr. Hers, Mrs. Driscoll, and Mr. Scragg. Not surprisingly, this is what Mrs. Driscoll told Mrs. Good about potentially postponing the meeting.
I guess, will this require, I know there's a lot of upper-level staff here today, and would that require them to come back? It would, but it would be hard to... It would, but our job is to make sure you guys have what you need, so if that's what happens, that's what happens. I appreciate the consideration. I feel like I had what I needed, but I don't know if... I guess I feel like the notice went out, even though what needed to be read wasn't there. If someone noticed that, they would have informed you right away if they needed it earlier. I will say that I myself, and none of my known staff had received an email from a citizen before 8:30 on Monday morning. I received one email regarding the packet and asking a question about that. And it was soon resolved after that, so. Correct, but I can't speak for those people who didn't speak out. Maybe they looked at it, were busy eating turkey, and didn't send us an email. I don't know. Right.
She lied right to your faces about what had gone on that day. Mrs. Good, I have those emails for you, as well as a copy of the Salina Journal online update that discusses city staff acknowledging being in communication with me that day. I was also told that Commissioner Hodges was also trying to get in contact with them about the packet not having this information. City staff doesn't respond on a holiday weekend. That's why I did Monday morning. And now here we are. They've circled the wagons and gotten the fire marshal and the Parks and Rec director to say that there are no issues. People who I have spoken with are no longer responding to me or saying that I did speak to them at all. Obviously, today was going to consist of the fire marshal saying everything was fine, no moratorium was needed, and no one was in immediate danger. To be clear, neither I nor anyone in this process said that there was immediate danger. They are also saying I misinterpreted the fire code on October 15th. My interpretation was completely accurate based on the lie that Dean Andrew and Troy Long were saying that the road was already installed. They are now saying it is incorrect due to the exception listed in Appendix D of Section D107, Exception 2, stating that the number of dwelling units on a single fire apparatus access road shall not be increased unless a fire apparatus access road will connect with the future development, as stated by Mr. Long, which I completely agree with now that we are acknowledging that there was a lie about the road being installed. Mr. Long has also stated in his memorandum for this meeting, including the staff packet, every code is designed to be used as a complete text. One cannot read a portion and stop. We have to look at the entire section of the code, so let's make sure we look at the entire section moving forward today.
Josh Jennings, 1401 Cobyron Circle.
Mr. Long also stated that the timing of the construction was not specified in regards to the emergency access path. Oddly, Dean Andrew told the paper it was supposed to be built because the design plans for the road were in Phase 1. I'm concerned, however, given the way the city works, that the fire marshal is going to say everything is up to code when it isn't.
Thank you.
Okay, time to pay attention. For that reason, I reached out to an outside expert on the fire code to see how things are supposed to be done. I want to review 2 email exchanges I had with Mr. Brad Crisp. Mr. Crisp was recently named the Deputy County Fire Chief for Sedgwick County Fire District 1. Mr. Crisp has worked with the Wichita Fire Department for over 30 years. During that time, he served as the safety and training officer as well as the fire marshal for an extended period of time. His knowledge, as you will hear, is very thorough and seems to be more directed at safety than the current or past fire marshals of Salina. On multiple occasions, I have pointed out what considers to be common sense about the fire code that has not been acknowledged by city staff and fallen on deaf ears. I asked these common sense questions to Mr. Crisp to help clarify. On November 14th, and the emails are in your packet that I just gave. On November 14th, I emailed Mr. Crisp these questions, and here are his responses. Does Sedgwick County or Wichita use separate fire access roads made out of grass pavers or geogrid that allows grass to overgrow the pavers, or geogrid since the road would not be identifiable once the grass is grown in? His response: we used to many years ago. We found they were not well maintained, were generally not identified, and certainly were unusable during inclement weather. We honor those which are currently in existence, but require them to put up fire signage, lane signage, every 40 feet, so we would know where they are located during evening hours in inclement weather. So these structures are not usable because they cannot be identified during good weather if they're overgrown by grass, and they certainly could not be identified during inclement weather covered in snow, for example. Question 2, if these were permitted and solely used for emergency access, would they have to be maintained like all streets on a regular basis? Specifically, would they require snow and ice to be plowed or cleared just like all regular streets? They would have to remain functional as much as possible 365 days a year to the same degree as regular streets. His response: yes, you are correct. However, as I stated above, maintenance has been an issue in the past. The fire code does not specify snow or ice removal of fire lanes or fire access roadway. It would be obvious that if a fire lane or access road is not maintained like a regular street, it would not do us any good. For example, if constructed of grass pavers, which are covered in snow, we would not use them because we would not know they were there, and most officers would not take the risk of getting their apparatus stuck, thereby creating a worse situation. This is why we no longer use them. Instead, we require an all-weather surface made of pavement 6 inches thick, asphalt 8 inches thick, RB3 rock 8 inches thick, or a combination of the aforementioned to hold the imposed load of a 20-pound axle. We have permitted percolation studies to prove all-weather surface can hold imposed loads during inclement weather. So, what is the current plan to maintain our path clear of ice and snow? Are we going to drag a 1,200-pound cast iron snowplow across a fairway and tear it up? Firefighters wouldn't risk driving onto a path they couldn't see, since it could lead to them getting the entire apparatus stuck, thereby creating a much worse scenario. It makes a lot of sense why they would require paved road the entire way in this scenario. I'm an intensivist at the hospital, which is a critical care specialist. Most patients I care for are dealing with severe emergencies. During my career, I have never received a call ahead of time from an emergency asking me if it was a convenient time for it to occur and if weather was permitting. This road needs to be maintained 365 days a year, day or night, just like any road. Clearly, the design we have wouldn't meet these requirements. Question 3, if only certain paths of the path or road meet fire requirements, would they be able to say it was able to be used and is safe in accordance with fire code? To clarify, if 50% of the road was functional and other points were a dirt path or did not meet 20-foot requirements, turns on the path were under the required turning radius, and emergency vehicles could not stay on the path. His response: we would argue the entire access route would need to be 20 feet wide, 13.5 feet high, all-weather surface to comply with fire code. There's an appendix in the back of the code, Appendix D, which helps us better understand the required turnaround radius for our fire apparatus. As you can imagine, not all apparatuses are created equal, and we do have to take into consideration exigent circumstances upon making final recommendation to turning radius of cul-de-sac and size of hammerhead turnaround. All of the path has to be functional. Not part of it grass pavers or geogrid, then back to millings, and then grass-covered areas.
Chandra Cruz, 1329 Bentgrass Drive.
On November 21st, as you can see in those emails I included, here are 3 more questions. Are there any clear recommendations on how long an emergency access road can be? Meaning, if the emergency access road is a winding road over a significant amount of distance that would take time for the fire department to maneuver, is there a limit on length or how long it would take to traverse before it is deemed unuseful? His response: yes, there is a limit on length before an access road will have to have a full-size turnaround or an outlet. It generally depends on some circumstances, however, the rule of thumb is 150 feet. The reason for the 150 feet maximum requirement is because it is dangerous to back out a large fire apparatus out of a dead end that far. Also, if they take a wrong turn and end up on a wrong street, it would take too long to get the apparatus out heading in the right direction. So the path we have designed across the golf course is anywhere from 800 to 1,000 feet long, depending on where they put the entrance off of Markley. It is not a straight path at all. It contains a half a dozen turns through a wooded area. Anything over 150 feet requires a turnaround point using a 96-foot wide diameter cul-de-sac or a 120-foot wide hammerhead turnaround as stated in Appendix D 103.4 of the International Fire Code, as provided by our fire marshal in our staff packet as well as me today in that packet. As you can see on Table D 103.4, please look at the table. You guys see it? Where the fire codes are listed for the International Fire Code, there's a table on the right side. See it? Anything over 500 feet actually needs to have a 26-foot wide road, not 20 feet wide road. And they don't have recommendations for access roads over 750 feet long. It just says special approval required, which likely means it's not recommended or ever done. You could argue that this path needs 2 of these turnarounds of a 96-foot wide cul-de-sac or a 120-foot wide hammerhead turnaround, especially since those trees could fall during inclement weather and any point in the path could be obstructed. As stated by Mr. Crisp, it would be very dangerous to back up a large apparatus out of the dead end, which could lead to getting the apparatus stuck. And his comment is probably referring to a straight path that's paved, unlike this one. And to be very clear, there are no easements granted for a 26-foot wide road, a 96-foot diameter cul-de-sac, or a 120-foot wide hammerhead turnaround. However, our fire marshal is completely overlooking this part of the fire code, though it would be clearly needed for this path to be safe and functional. As he stated, we should be looking at the fire code in a complete text, not just a portion and stopping. Question 2 on that day. Is there a limit on how long cul-de-sacs can be in Sedgwick County, Wichita, from the entrance point? 150 feet, however, I understand there are exceptions all the time, he said. So long as they give us a 96-foot radius turnaround or a hammerhead turnaround. We have allowed them to go up to 500 feet. In very rare instances, we have allowed 700 feet. I have included the Salina Muni Code in the packet today, stating that the maximum recommended length for the Salina Muni Code is 600 feet. Variances were addressed for this neighborhood in 2009, approval by the City Commission, but this significant of a variance is very concerning. So the cul-de-sacs in the Grand Prairie are over 1,500 feet for Larkspur from the entrance point of Cedar Ridge, and 2,800 feet from the entrance point in Bentgrass Drive to the end of Phase 3. We granted cul-de-sacs in regards to Larkspur that is nearly 3 times the maximum recommended length, and that road has no attachment to the emergency access road we are discussing. And a cul-de-sac that is almost 5 times the maximum recommended length for Bentgrass Drive, and then we combined it with those variances with an excessively long, winding emergency access road through a wooded area across a golf course that isn't even paved or going to be maintained during inclement weather. That doesn't sound safe to me, and it certainly isn't up to fire code. Question 3. When subdivisions are being built in phases, is there a limit of time when the emergency access road should be present and functional? Meaning if it takes 30 years for the subdivision to be built, is it okay for that subdivision to have no other access during those 30 years? His response, unfortunately, no. We recognized the problem several years ago and are currently negotiating with the developers to give us our secondary means of access up front, even if it is on the same main street as the main entrance. We would rather have 2 entrances on the same street than only have one for 30-plus years. So this portion is very interesting. Getting the secondary means of access up front could clearly be an intention by the City Commission or the Planning Commission or even the Fire Marshal to ensure a form of safety. Mr. Baffa made a good point in the paper stating when they approved the plats for these homes without the access road, that was a mistake back then. As approved by the City Commission in 2009 on the bottom of page 2 and the top of page 3, which I have included in that packet, the final approval, which I have put in the packet, it states that the emergency access road shall be constructed before any occupancy permit be granted in the entire subdivision. Not one person should be living in this subdivision without that in place. They violated this approval and do not have approval to allow anyone to live in the subdivision without the emergency access road. Now, in the staff,
Sorry to be tardy. I run a business. My name is Jan Boland. I currently live at 2203 Applewood Lane. We are building a home at 1338 Bentgrass Drive. I release my 5-minute time to Mr. Hinkie.
Thank you, Jan.
Excuse me, Dr. Hinkie.
Thank you, Jan, again. Now, in the staff packet for this meeting, they put in that construction of the road was deferred to the developer not submitting phases initially. There was no scenario that the City Commission would have thought they were going to install 1,600 feet of cul-de-sac for Larkspur and 2,800 feet of cul-de-sac up front for Bentgrass and have an immediate connection to the emergency access road. That vote was to have the emergency access road built first before anyone lived there. Mr. Andrews even stated in the paper, as we discussed earlier, that he thought the road had been built because the design plans for the road were in Phase 1. That road has nothing to do with the phasing in Phase 1 as approved, would have never been able to connect to the emergency access road. The reasoning doesn't make sense for this to be deferred. The developer has nothing to do with the access road. Even Mr. Shepard stated that in the paper regarding the path. Has nothing to do with my development, he said. The road was to be built by the city before occupancy permits were permitted. This portion of the city staff report is completely made up. It maybe explains why they tried to not provide the information on time before the Planning Commission meeting on December 3rd, so I couldn't fact check everything. The fire marshal and zoning administrator or any city staff cannot make the unilateral decision to override the vote and intention of the Planning Commission, city commissioners, and mayor's approval of the project to have that road in place first, which is what they're trying to do and how they are presenting it in the packet today. The city commission approval has been violated without that road in place, and no one should be allowed to live there until the access road is in place according to the approval. Do not accept what they put in the staff report. It is completely made up, and they cannot override that approval. So, now I can't help but draw a similarity between what Mr. Crisp told me and about the fire code and emergency access roads to what the two initial Salina firefighters told myself and Mr. Gary on September 30th. When we found that the emergency access road was not installed as stated. Why is there such a variance between our past and current fire marshals compared to Wichita's past fire marshal and our own firefighters? The difference is because our past and current fire marshals are unwilling to do the job they were hired to do because they are compromised by conflicts of interest. The entire project from the beginning was based on the city of Salina being a co-applicant in this process, which is represented by Steve Snyder. The fire marshal is an employee of the applicant. Thus, a clear ethics violation has been allowed due to this influence of other departments on the fire department and stating that it is at the fire marshal's discretion to overlook parts of the fire code and grant significant variances to standard procedures. The city staff's willingness to influence the fire department was clearly demonstrated earlier by Ms. Driscoll saying she was going to get our other firefighter in trouble for providing information about the fire code to me. Even in the original resolution from January 28th, 2008, and the original cornerstone development request to the city, which I have included in the back of the packet, it states mutual interests involved and benefits to the city to make this project work. Given this influence and conflict of interest, it is absolutely not acceptable to say these types of things are at the discretion of the fire marshal, who is ignoring sections of the fire code, and was stating the same lie that the zoning administrator was, that the road had already been installed. This setup with an employee of a co-applicant being used could possibly be acceptable if the fire code was held up completely, but this repeated statement that the fire marshal's discretion is a clear ethics violation. And because of that violation, we have this ridiculous access road being put forward as an acceptable option. Reading through my email exchange with Mr. Crisp, it is pretty clear that this path is completely obsolete. I stated on November 5th that without public knowledge of this process, I don't think it would be handled appropriately. At some point, I would hope the city will display some decorum and accountability and acknowledge that this neighborhood / Phase 3 and the access road through the golf course should have never been approved because it wasn't safe, realistic, ethical, or honest. I've been in contact with the Kansas news station about a segment on this story. I think it would be good for the majority of Kansas to know about how Salina conducts itself and its low standards when it comes to public safety, ethical behavior, respecting individual property rights, and using public facilities like a golf course to make sure developers can make as much money as possible. I don't think it's surprising to learn the population of Salina isn't growing. People do not want to live in a place where city government lies, sacrifices safety, fire marshals ignore their duties, and no one is held accountable. I struggle to understand why the people of Salina do not deserve the same standards of safety that other cities have and a fire marshal that prioritizes safety. The great thing is that the more people that learn about these types of things in Salina, the fewer people you will have that will want to live and move here. So we won't have these types of problems with new developments because we won't need them.
Tim Henry, 1333 Bentgrass.
Let's be honest, this whole thing is not a coincidence. This is not the first time that the planning administrator, city staff, and fire marshals have been untruthful or misleading about things and misinformed the planning commission or city commissioners, or unethical things have been allowed to move forward. Who knows how many neighborhoods have these emergency access issues? Who knows how many of these other issues this commission has approved unknowingly that may have put people at risk for harm because of how things were presented? That would cause me to lose sleep. This commission probably thought they were helping guide decisions when really you need to be policing and investigating what is being presented to make sure it is true, because most of it seems to be false. And to summarize, They had no intention of ever building this emergency access road. If they did, they would have did it before any occupancy permits were allowed, just like the City Commission and Planning Commission intended with their approval. They should not be able to move forward with any more occupancy permits until an acceptable emergency access road is available, as they have already violated the City Commission's approval. They cannot unilaterally override the approval of elected officials regarding this project and when the emergency access road is to be built. They were not going to build the emergency access road because there would be no point to build it. It would never be used in any scenario by the fire department, even if it was built, and has never been up to code due to multiple reasons we have discussed today. Building it would be a waste of taxpayer dollars and clearly negatively affect the golf course. The whole project was unethical, leaving an employee of the co-applicant to overlook portions of the fire code at their discretion and to say the neighborhood was safe. The access road was presented dishonestly to the Planning Commission by the original Parks and Rec Director, Steve Snyder. The easements granted still do not fit what is required for an emergency access road that would be up to code. If the required turnarounds were placed on the course, it would obstruct golf play significantly. Roger Williams approved a design for an emergency access road that was never safe or up to code, along with an excessively long cul-de-sacs so the developer could get in as many lots as possible. And still, they got greedy and tried to split lots in Phase 3 even further. Without them doing that, we wouldn't even be aware of these scenarios. Our zoning administrator, who currently has recused himself, has lied more times than I can count at this point. City staff seem to be limiting information about the problems with this project to their superiors, as well as the city commissioners and planning commission. Our current fire marshal is now continuing to lie that this access road is safe and up to code. However, due to all of these issues, he is now saying it can be built later, which is not acceptable, given it was to be built before anyone lived here, and the design is still not up to code. Keep in mind, this is not the first time they have done this. Highland Meadows has nearly 60 homes currently, with the potential for more than 80. It only has one entrance. River Run has nearly 30 homes now, with a lot of open lots to build on, one entrance as well. They just proposed this ridiculous access road through the golf course to get city approval for the neighborhood in this layout. They never intended on building it because it wouldn't be able to serve the purpose it was approved for. I just struggle to think that there's a city dumb enough to build a road across the middle of holes on a golf course, not in between holes, right through the middle of where people play. I have played a significant number of golf courses, and I have never seen such a ridiculous concept. I would hope that this planning commission does not allow them to move forward with this, given the amount of dishonesty, lies, despicable behavior that has occurred with this project. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for your comments. Is there comments from any other interested citizens? Or anyone else? Comments?
My name's Alan Eichelberger. I live at 2132 Columbine Court. And I'm not here on their agenda, but from Mariposa's point of view. When we originally, when this Grand Prairie was approved, there was a lot of concept that we had concerns about our retention pond. And can you show that up on the map? This retention pond right there, actually from the water before this addition was even approved or put in, that retention pond was actually blown out. It was removed, and we had to pay part of that expense at the time. The city kind of helped us out a little bit, but we no longer have the funds left to replace it. And with the additional lots of 21 lots, or 21 driveways, with the new road going in that's 20 foot wide, it sounds like it's anywhere from 800 to 1,000 feet. That's a lot of water. That's not a lot of absorption area that's going to happen. I would like to share with you, and people really don't know how much water comes across that golf course, but if you could just share this around with each other. Here's a couple of pictures of water coming off the golf course and moving into our retention pond. So when you talk about, this was prior to this development being put in. And so we're now, the retention ponds are working a little bit, but we're also still seeing this kind of water come into our retention pond. So if that blows out, we're going to eat the expense. So how do we protect ourselves as Mariposa? So that's my comment, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Comments from anyone else?
My name's Mark Coble. I live at 2144 Columbine Terrace. I am the president of the Mariposa Homeowners Association, and I'm here to represent them. When Cornerstone was planned and platted, as it currently sits, water studies determined that post-development runoff to the Mariposa HOA detention pond would be roughly as follows. The City of Salina-owned municipal golf course, 53.6%, Mariposa homeowners, 18.8%, and Cornerstone, 27.6%. Those are the percentages going into our detention pond. Based on this study, our HOA agreed to accept $20,000 excuse me, to allow Cornerstone a sanitary sewer easement and this 27.6% water runoff contribution into our detention pond. With this payment, we agreed to accept Cornerstone Development Group's 27.6% portion of any future repairs to our detention pond. This agreement wasn't for 5 years or 10 years. It was a final agreement. At the request of homeowners living nearby, I recently took a closer look at our detention pond and can personally verify that with the addition of water from Grand Prairie, our detention pond seems to be taking on more water than ever. We're struggling right now to maintain the base of that. It's mush. We used to be able to mow that thing consistently. Now, there are unmowed areas in that right now. So it's holding water fairly consistently. According to Mr. Andrew, the original plat, the one currently in place and the one used to determine the percentage of water into our detention pond, Phase 3 had a building density of 1.88 units per acre. The proposed replat by Mr. Andrews' figures would increase that density in Phase 3 to approximately 3.88 units per acre, a density increase of over 100% in Phase 3. The Mariposa HOA has an agreement that was based on the plat provided by Cornerstone Development. We don't have the option of backing out of that agreement. We can't just decide that we no longer want to accept the full 27.6% runoff that his development provides. Imagine if we said, we know we have a legal agreement, but we've made some changes in our neighborhood, and we're going to need you to reduce the amount of water you send to our detention pond. We need that space for our own needs. In this case, we have an agreement in place with Cornerstone and the City of Salina, and if the Planning Commission allows for a replat, knowing full well that a replat would more than double the density in Phase 3, and thus significantly increase the amount of water heading to our detention pond, you would be changing the fundamentals used to come to that 2009 agreement. We do not believe that the Planning Commission has the legal authority to issue a decision that would modify the terms of this 2009 agreement without the consent of all three parties, nor would it be ethically correct to force additional liability on the Mariposa HOA simply because a neighboring developer decides he'd like to sell more lots. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kevin Royce, Salina Fire Chief. Just wanted to bring it to your attention that anytime in the fire code that you see the term authority having jurisdiction, this is the face of the authority having jurisdiction. I have the final say when that term comes up of authority having jurisdiction. Fire marshal works for me. Previous fire marshal worked for me. And I will tell you now that we do not have a lower standard of safety in this city. My people are ethical. They do not lie. And I just want to put that on the record. I don't appreciate those comments from a citizen to people who work every day to make this city a safe and secure community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Captain.
Good afternoon. My name is John Blanchard. I'm a landscape architect, a professional land planner, and I've been in the community site planning business for over 30 years. I've designed over 3 dozen large
Excuse me. Could
subdivisions.
we have your address? Sorry, could we have your address?
Oh, I'm sorry. I live at 250 South 9th Street.
Thank you.
And I'd like to speak to, I don't want to get into too much of the fire lane stuff, but I do have a comment at the end of my comments here, and I appreciated Mr. Olson, or Commissioner Olson, your question regarding the phasing and the timing of that road. As I mentioned, I've had considerable site planning. I've designed over 3 dozen high-end residential subdivisions. I don't know how many people on staff have professional site planning experience, but I have dealt with the fire code for 30 years. It hasn't significantly changed in the way professional planners design subdivisions. Very rarely does the fire code come into play, which is important for you guys. None of you got on the planning commission to go over fire code stuff. You want to do your role, which is to try to help create a harmonious environment concerned with health, safety, and a quality community, and also to promote public health and safety among those. A number of the things that were brought up as far as the need for how long is a cul-de-sac? How long? We have a code that says 600 feet, but that's only a small part of what, it's a recommendation. Typically, you want to design your cul-de-sac length or dead-end lengths based on average daily trips. You want to have an efficient road system. Typically, you want to steer away from professional planners, steer away from cul-de-sacs because they're inefficient. They're basically glorified private driveways. And your role as a planning commissioner, you're really looking at what is the most efficient and effective use of our resources that we have, and how the built environment looks. So I want to address the replat because that's the underlying issue here. I think that you should deny any replat above what's already existing for a couple of reasons. One is that I mentioned your average daily trips. What you really want to look at is a balance somewhere between 15 and 25 lots per dead-end street. And that averages out to about 150 to 250 average daily trips. And so for that reason, that you don't want a lot more lots on there, you really don't want what you have on there now, and you certainly don't want to add to that. But also, to place density at the dead-end portion of that cul-de-sac is really backward planning. And there's a saying that says, failing to plan is planning to fail. That would be a real failure. And for the most part, you would be cratering the folks that have invested in that community. You would really be doing great harm to their property values. And that's one of the considerations as a planning commissioner that you're up here to help determine. How we got here, I think, is important. And as I said, failing to plan is planning to fail. This project was doomed in 2009 when folks at the city decided that the answer to undevelopable land is to have variances on the length of a cul-de-sac. And that policy was an official policy by the city manager's office. I don't know to what extent commissioners were involved, but I do know that it impacted city staff significantly, and I've heard a lot of negative comments about that policy. And that policy was called yes, somehow. They want to say yes, somehow. No should have been the answer at that time. It's undevelopable land. And I think that you need to act on your best judgment and say no to the replat now. The question was, or the statement was made before, who knows?
Carlson, 1217 Bentgrass. I give my time to him.
Oh, thank you. How many neighborhoods in Salina currently have this? Well, I counted, and in addition to the subdivisions that Mr. Hankey mentioned, You also have a lot of subdivisions that are older than that, and also subdivisions that were added on that only have one way in and out that, that don't have a secondary access. And so I think one of the things that, positive things that can come out of this is that you really need to do an inventory of where those conditions exist and what you might be able to do to fix those conditions. And I can give you, I don't have the list with me, but I can make available to some of you or staff or whatever, the ones that I've been able to come up with. One of the things about, and so on the fire access road, one of the things that I think is missing in some of the staff report that was put out was that originally I think the subdivision might have been originally planned for 2 phases. It's hard to find the phasing plan from the original, the preliminary plat or the final plat. But the first part of the plat was about 35 lots. The second phase was about 35 lots. And then phase 2, it looks like, got split into 2 phases. I think it may have been mentioned before, but the proper thing to do, and it's why I would encourage you to stick with the moratorium and get this road fixed, because as Commissioner Olson asked, and the answer was two more houses need to be built before it's required, but there are significantly more lots than that available. And I think there ought to be consideration given to people that have bought lots in anticipation of building, that they would have the ability to not only sell those lots, but to build on them as well. And I think whatever the process is for phase 3, that timing may be significantly longer than putting that emergency road in there. When the special assessment benefit districts were created, they were created under the system of equally distributing by lot the common costs. There were people in phase 2 are paying for water improvements. The water actually loops. It comes from around Dean Evans Stadium, and it comes under the raw ground where phase 3 is, and comes through those easements as well as the drainage and everything. So there have been significant common costs divided over, I think it's 70 lots. And I just think it would be kind of tricky. How do you go back and redivide that benefit district when people have already been paying on those for years? That's something for probably someone else. But I think what it illustrates, though, is that there really was no serious consideration given to additional lots, whether they were called phase 2 or phase 3. And for that reason, I would suggest that I think you were right, and I think Dean Andrew was right when he said that when he called for the moratorium, that this road should have been built in phase 2. And when the argument is made that there's nothing to connect it to, how you connect it is by use of a temporary fire access road. And those do exist. There's one being required currently for Stone Lake development, which has just gone through the process. And also at Pheasant Ridge, up east of Crawford, north of Crawford, up by the church up there, there's an 800-foot gravel emergency access road there, because it's temporary, because the next phasing isn't going to come before they're at their 30-unit level. So I think you guys acted appropriately in recommending a moratorium until that road is built, but I think you need to add on to it that the temporary connection needs to be made between their emergency access that comes off the golf course and the end of the cul-de-sac that's currently on bent grass. That was much longer than I had anticipated, so I thank the lady for yielding me her time. And again, I request that you deny any replat, and I request that you re-forward your moratorium request with the requirement that temporary emergency access
Thank you for your
connection be
comments.
made. Thanks.
Don Went, 1401 Bentgrass Drive. I yield my time to Dr. Henke.
Two quick comments. I respect the fire department unconditionally. I work with firefighters every day at the hospital. Our hospital wouldn't function without them transporting patients and working diligently with us. Even those firefighters that came out that day told us specifically, Roger Marshall approved things all the time that should have never been approved. Mr. Gary was with me when he said that. One of them said that. When I met with Lauren Driscoll and Dustin Hers on November 7th, can we pull up the map of the neighborhood by chance? What I was suggesting at that time, because let's be honest, these decisions have kind of soiled the bed and we all have to roll around in it now, is to treat the neighborhood as two neighborhoods, trying to connect the road here to Cedar Ridge, treating it as 30 and 30. The connection I wouldn't think we should get rid of. Other than that, I don't know how we would, the emergency access road is not doable with the length and the amount of turnarounds needed per fire code. The only stipulation there is that there is a hill right here that would have to be excavated due to sight lines of the turnout. Other than that, I don't know how you would ever make this doable. And it should have never been approved, just like Mr. Blanchard said. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to comment?
Good evening at this point. My name is Mike Scragg. I'm the city manager. Served as deputy city manager from 2005 until January of this year. One of my primary responsibilities was development services. And so at the point that I was hired, it was made very clear to me that the development was a challenge, and Salina had a reputation of being difficult to work with and driving away development. So the yes somehow approach was the result of a chamber task force into that topic, and it kind of drove our expectation to try to facilitate growth, but it did not drive it to the point of waiving or avoiding life safety issues. I worked with Roger Williams the entire time that I was here until he retired. I would agree with the points that have been made. We have a considerable past practice of trying to balance development and temporary access roads and emergency access points. There's plenty of examples throughout the community. Just working from recollection, and I've had a little bit of opportunity to look at the information, but this is a level of detail that's played itself out over 11 years now, so that's a little difficult to keep all that straight. Working from recollection, it would not surprise me at all that with the best of intentions, Mr. Williams identified that there's multiple entrance points in the turnarounds as Fire Marshal Long described, and rationalized, and allowing for a delayed installation of the emergency access road. I didn't directly supervise Mr. Williams, but I worked with him on an ongoing basis, and he if you ask the development community, I think his reputation would be to hold people to a high standard, not to waive things inappropriately or unsafely. And so I think we have a combination of things going on. In all honesty, I can't speak to the details of the statement of no occupancy permit shall be issued until such time as the access road is in. That would be somewhat in contrast to past practice and trying to accommodate development with later installation of access roads. With respect to the configuration of the access road and the width and some of the issues raised as concerns by Wichita, it appears that they've learned over time from past experience, and maybe they're ahead of us on the learning curve. But again, I can tell you consistently the description that Mr. Long gave about the standards for a fire access road whereas he described. I've heard it countless times in individual meetings with development. So this is not a contrived or manipulated approach to justify this particular development. It's unfortunate we have a lot of variables at play. It's unfortunate that it's come to this, and staff has acknowledged that they've made some errors in terms of assumptions and statements that they've made. At the end of the day, I think, well, with respect to the golf course configuration, if you're familiar with the golf course, or if you're a golfer, the proposed location as it crosses the course is between two tee boxes. If your ball ends up not traveling past the tee boxes, that's generally a source of embarrassment. That's not where you typically want to be playing, and then it heads off into the rough. And so I don't know that it's as disruptive as you might think, just if it were to cut through a fairway per se. So there's a lot at play here. There were some prior approvals that I do have concerns about, vested interests that the developer may have based on the approvals. But I think at the end of the day, there is a question about the appropriateness of the replat. That's probably the issue that's in your purview in terms of what was originally approved and whether it's appropriate to intensify that. I think there's a statement at one point made that Mr. Andrew is approving or facilitating. As you well know, he serves in a support role to you as a staff person, and he's bringing you information for you to exercise your authority and make recommendations to the City Commission. And over my career, I very frequently have people get frustrated that staff shouldn't even let an item come to an advisory body. It's not our role to hold that back. It's our role to process it and bring it to you for your consideration. So you've got a lot on your plate. I would acknowledge that. Certainly, like Chief Royce, take considerable exception to any attempt to characterize staff with negative, ulterior, or unethical motive. There may be errors here. It's very complex. I don't think any staff member is denying that. But in my time working with them, I hold all of our staff in high regard as it relates to development services and trying to do what's right, and certainly have to take exception to that.
Thank you, Mr. Schrag. Any other comments?
Vice Commissioner, sorry for the interruption. If I might request a copy of anybody's notes that they had in their hand today so that I can include them in the minutes and have a very good representation of what was said. Thank you.
I think anything that was handed out to the commission. So your personal notes you get to keep, but I have a copy of the packet that was distributed, but I do not have a copy of the photographs that were shared. So just if after the meeting, if I could get at least one copy of that.
If you guys don't have extra copies out there, we can share what we have up here.
I will make copies if somebody doesn't have copies.
Commissioners,
Sorry.
excuse me. I'm Kenton Driver, 1320 Larkspur. As an avid golfer and golfing all over the country and the United States, I'd hate to see an access road going across any fairways, up close to any greens. Many golf courses that we play throughout the United States have neighborhood roads that zigzag through them. As John knows, you have to stop a lot of times at the road. Cars go by, golf cart roads. You know, one of the greatest road holes ever over the old course, number 17, has a road going right down it, and it makes it very complex. One of the greatest golf holes in the world. So having the golf course impacted in any way is not something I would be for. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comment. Any other comments? Seeing none, I will go ahead and close the public comment portion of this meeting, but then we may, if commissioners have questions of staff, we may bring staff back up. So is there anything you'd like to follow up on with staff after hearing comments?
And of course, Madam Chair, if questions come up as you discuss as a body, of course, staff is happy to answer any of those questions as they come up.
Well, I guess just a reminder that our task tonight is to decide whether to move forward with the moratorium or withdraw that motion. It does not have to do with replatting tonight.
Correct. So if you do look at page 17 in the staff report, it says the following options are in front of you. 1, stay the motion as made, 10-15-19, amend the previously adopted motion, rescind the motion, or postpone further action on a motion previously adopted until further information be provided. To stay the motion would mean keep the motion as it is, go forward, request a moratorium from the City Commission.
To stay the motion requires no action then.
Correct.
And you say there are 27 homes right now?
23 have building permits, 25 occupied.
I believe the audience said 28.
So the moratorium really should be on any homes in excess of 30 then.
Correct. I do wonder if this is a time to talk about vested right. If somebody already has property in Phase 2, do we need to discuss that at all, Greg? I'm sorry, I'm looking to the city attorney.
Thank you. Greg Binkson, Clark Mize and Linville, legal counsel to the city. There is the matter, and one of the key questions is whether the subdivision, as approved, the plat of the subdivision, as approved by the Planning Commission originally, whether that was in accordance with all applicable requirements or not, and if so, has development been implemented in accordance with those requirements? The point that Ms. Driscoll refers to is the law recognizes that as subdivision or as development occurs, the key to going forward with lawful development is the recording of the plat. And at that point, Kansas law recognizes what is referred to a vesting of development rights as a result of that recording. There was a change, or there's a dividing point considering the date of approval. But development does have to occur within a certain period of time. That plat can't just lay idle on record. But assuming development occurs as it has in this case, there is the matter of vesting of those rights. My sense is that, and I don't know how far it is helpful, it's not mine to determine. I was trying to follow in the packet that you presented as to the point of whether it was clear from the Planning Commission standpoint. And the point here is that the Planning Commission actually either approves or denies the plat. That's a matter of state law. The role of the City Commission in that circumstance is strictly the acceptance of the dedications that are associated with that plat. So one point of clarification at some point in time, I do think it's important to precisely determine how the matter was addressed at that point in time as far as requirements associated with the timing of the installation of the road. I think I would understand that to be the key issue as to whether that was addressed as it was anticipated and approved by the respective bodies as they dealt with all of the issues that this situation presented. So that's, I believe, the point that Ms. Driscoll was concerned about addressing. We do have to recognize that under normal circumstances, there is a degree of finality associated with the approval of the plat. It sounds as though there could possibly be some need for further analysis and further review of exactly what occurred, both in terms of the terms of that approval and the implementation of the development that has occurred, as that would affect the latitude that this body has and ultimately the City Commission, if it is still your desire to consider recommendation of any sort of moratorium. So I don't know but what there aren't some facts to further identify and be able to report ultimately to you all and ultimately to the City Commission. But that would seem to be where the matter stands in my mind.
Does anyone have any questions before you sit down, Mr. Bankston? Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, so to clarify, what you're saying is it has been approved previously on the 3 phases. Our question now is, do we allow the phases to continue, and what do we allow to continue through phase 1 and phase 2? Because if we go back to the fire staff, where we've got a 30-lot limit, based on the fire code that we're meeting, we're currently setting at 28. If there's 2 more developed in there, we've reached that limit. So now do we have an access road, and where do we make the access road? Because if you look at the way it's currently plotted, phase 1, there's more than 30 lots at that point. There's more than 30 lots on phase 3. We know we're going to have to do something into, or phase 2, we're going to have to do something into phase 3, and then at that same time, we have to decide, did the previous planning commission, the previous city commission do the right thing by allowing the construction of a road across the golf course? I'm not a golfer. Okay, so, but that's everything that we have to look at. So at this point is, to me, really, our question is, do we move forward with the moratorium, realize he had approval for the developer, he went through the steps that he needed to. Did we make mistakes earlier, or were mistakes made earlier? Do we correct them now?
And is there a lawful basis for doing so?
Exactly.
Yes.
And is one of our other questions, if we go through with the moratorium, how it affects those in the process of building? Is that what I heard as a question? Or is that, if you're in the process of building, you can continue to build?
Well, if you're under the 30 still with the existing building permits, as mentioned earlier, based off the question that Commissioner Baffa posed, your motion from 1015 does not specifically call out that 30 count, but it does say any new building permits in Grand Prairie Addition until, so basically no new building permits until code compliant plan for an emergency access road connecting Markley Road and Bent Grass is in place. And meets the requirements of Salina Fire Department. So if we follow that, based on this moratorium, if we took it to the city commission, the recommendation would be to not issue any more building permits based on what you guys said. That kind of takes out of effect the number 30. It's just saying at this point, no more building permits because of safety concerns.
Well, maybe a question is how many, we hear that there's 28 homes, but how many, are there building permits out above those 28?
Well, what I heard in the audience was 25 with 3 active building permits. I don't have those numbers in front of me. I can get those for you, but I don't want to
Right, no, I understand.
incorrectly give a number.
Right.
But if, based on what audience feedback is, with 3 active, 25 already approved, then that still has you below that 30 threshold.
And I would imagine that there may be 2 lots that have been purchased for future building, and if we continue the moratorium that we have right now, those people can't do anything with that property. So that's why I asked, maybe we do need to amend the motion to allow up to 30 homes, just to protect those people's interests that may have purchased a lot.
Would that cover it? I mean, is it, this 30, anything above 30 is kind of a line in the sand?
Needed access road after 30.
Right. I mean, to me, the safety is the biggest concern, and it's pretty black and white when it comes to that.
Well, if I may, Commissioner, I'll answer your question. I don't, that makes sense. I understand the point. The reason I consulted quickly with the city manager, as you all may know, I don't have any discretionary authority about anything. So I wanted to be sure. We obviously have a working relationship between this body and the city commission. And it sounds as though we may very well have a legal issue to address in terms of the manner in which the initial subdivision approval occurred and how it was subsequently implemented. As Mr. Scragg and I discussed briefly, that could either occur before you take further action, but I certainly realize everyone is anxious to move this along as well and as rapidly as possible, I'm sure. That development of that opinion, should it be thought to be helpful, could certainly be developed in the interim between whatever recommendation you might choose based on what you've heard today, such that it would then be part of the City Commission's consideration as they would respond to your recommendation. I think either way you wish to go would be appropriate.
Thank you.
I have a question for Mr. Long, and that is, at one of the previous meetings, I believe the developer had made a comment that originally Phase 1 and Phase 2 were approved due to the fact that there was a boulevard-style entrance into this subdivision. And I wanted to know what the impact of having the dual-lane entrance exit into the subdivision have on that 30 limit, knowing now that we actually have some expertise with the fire department represented.
So the fire code speaks to secondary means of egress. It has to be more than half the distance from the main entrance. So the boulevard entrance, however nice it is that, you know, if we had a car accident or something like that in one lane, we could use the other lane. That is generally not what we see in our housing developments. We don't generally see this boulevard style, but it doesn't impact emergency access as far as having a secondary means of egress.
Thank you.
So it sounds like, I feel better if there's a boulevard there, but it doesn't really help.
Right.
Okay. We ready for a motion?
Depends on what it is.
I move that we amend the previously adopted motion made on October 15th of this year to include a moratorium after 30 dwellings have been built, pending legal review.
Second it.
Okay, the motion has been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion or questions on that motion?
My only concern is that it was worded that they were built, and I think it should be that the building permits approved to 30.
Those who own the lots, have purchased lots, they would be able to.
Your motion said that after 30 were built, but I wanted to say that after 30 permits have been issued.
Yeah.
Okay.
So would you amend? Does it
So
need
a
to be
friendly
formal?
amendment?
That sounds good.
Yeah. So Mr. Baffy, you accept?
Yes, I accept.
Okay.
Great. Everyone understand the motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, say no. Motion passed.
Madam Chair, I'm just looking at the calendar with the holiday. Our next city commission meeting would be January 6th, because, am I reading? No, next city commission is Monday, the 6th, because there's no meeting on the 23rd or the 30th of December. So that would move us to the 6th. So staff will prepare this item and move the moratorium forward to the City Commission as requested.
Okay. Thank you. And then in the meantime, I guess we would expect some legal review as to timing and things that we discussed this evening and.
Yeah, at this point, we'll move forward with the moratorium on Monday. We would do that legal review, include it with the moratorium information, and then you would have a meeting following that. So we would be able to update you on the 7th.
Okay, thank you. Is there any preliminary discussion items that staff has, other than what we just said?
No, I don't think so. I've lost the agenda.
And any unfinished or other business?
I would like to look, or to put on the agenda down the road, the peeling paints on houses, and also tree stumps in the right-of-way.
I'm sorry, I did not catch the first item.
Peeling paints?
Paint.
Commissioner Baffa, can I ask just for a little bit more detail, as in, like, are we talking about like property maintenance concerns or, okay.
Yes. And then when we talk about tree stumps too, I think we ought to look at the ordinance of topping trees not being enforced.
Okay, so that third one is the topping of trees.
Well, okay, if you want to make it the third one, I just thought we could together.
Okay. And that's still within the right-of-way for tree topping?
Yes.
Okay. We will get that into a future agenda.
Okay, anything else? Actually, the next agenda item is public forum. I hesitate to. Yes, Mr. Blanchard.
John Blanchard, 250 South 9th. Just a quick question in regard to the last item. On 3.1, it was a consideration of the replat request. Was there any action necessary on the replat? Because you postponed action on a replat, and if you don't take action on a replat, does that not mean that it dies? That's just the question on the replat, because it was the moratorium was a subset of the original thing that had taken place. And then just from a process perspective, is there a timing consideration? Will the secretary of the planning commission, who is Dean Andrew, is he required to forward that recommendation on to the city commission for action? And is there any sort of anticipated calendar of action by the city commission so that people that have lots that may be caught in the position of being number 31 or higher might be made aware of kind of what what issues they might be facing?
I did just address this, that this will go to the city commission on January 6th, the moratorium, as we just discussed. So the city commission would be able to take action on that moving forward. If there is a moratorium, then property owners would be notified, therefore. So
okay, so you're saying that it is required of the secretary of the planning commission to forward
that is not what I said.
recommendation?
I said this item will be going forward to
Okay,
the city commission.
So then you're saying that it's not, the secretary of the planning commission is not required to forward any recommendations from this board onto anybody else?
It is the requirement of staff to provide and move forward actions and recommendations by the planning commission to the city commission.
Okay, and that was done when the original moratorium was made?
This original request was made. There were concerns related to the information that had been provided in which the planning commission made their decision on. Staff requested, which is a perfectly reasonable request, and discussed this with city administration and city legal staff, if we had the right to bring this back before bringing it in front of the city commission to assure that the planning commission was going to stay this decision based on the information provided. We have done that. They have reconsidered. They have made their motion, and it will move forward as noted by staff in January.
I now understand Mr. Hankey's frustration. Thank you.
Dr. Hickey Blanchard. I just ask as a favor, can we please send notification to the property owners? There was clearly a delay in relaying information from when the moratorium was suggested to Ms. Driscoll to the City Commission. So can we just go ahead and do that now as a favor? That's all I ask.
We would be happy to do that, and we have sent out additional mailings for the last 2 meetings that are not required, but as requested by the public, we have done so.
I saw that in the packet. Thank you. Any other comments on the public forum part?
And what he just said, I'm Chris Carlson, 1217 Bentgrass. I'm curious about the plat thing too. So is it dead? Is it moving on? Are you guys going to decide where are we at with the plat part of it?
So the motion that was made still postpones action on the plat.
Okay.
So, from what I understand, we will deal with the moratorium postponing and can consider what time that is going to be postponed until.
Okay.
I'm looking to Greg if I am misinterpreting that.
I just didn't hear the plat being part of that, so I just
Yeah, so
wanted
the-
to double check that I am completely understanding you, because the letter that we received, I was under the impression that the platting was moving over to the commission, so I kind of misunderstood that.
So the current amendment reads, postpone consideration of a replat and recommend a moratorium on any new building permits in Grand Prairie addition until code-compliant plan for an emergency access road connecting Markley Road and Bentgrass that meets the requirements of Salina Fire Department is in place. So it basically says, don't act on the plat, deal with the moratorium. So when we set the notice out for tonight, we said, we're not going to act on the plat tonight.
Okay.
We're not talking about it. We're talking about this motion. We just didn't want people to come and say, you know, we don't like the way the plat lines go or how many lots. It's really about the motion. So the motion still contains language that says postponed.
Okay.
And so the amendment to this motion would change the way it reads. It would say, postpone consideration of a replat on P08-2B and recommend a moratorium on any new building permits past 30 until a code-compliant plan for any emergency access road connecting Markley Road and Bentgrass Drive that meets the requirements of Salina Fire Department is in place. Is that what you have?
The last of it, I don't have all of it. I have all of the first part.
Pending legal review.
And pending legal review.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that those were tied together and that we understood it. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Quick question, is there a limit to how many times we can continue to postpone this?
So the motion is to postpone the action. Once this is taken, we'll have to choose till what time it's postponed till. So.
Because we need to act on it, one way or
Correct.
the other. And as Mr. Bengtson said, this commission has the final say on that. But we want to learn more of the legalities, I guess, of the timing and what is it that we can act on.
Well, I think it would be fair to have the discussion with the city commission based on your recommendation for the moratorium that may create a situation in which it's decided when to postpone till. I also think it's important after this meeting, I'm sure the applicant may have consideration on when they feel like they want to postpone till. I mean, some of that is part of this discussion too. They may show up to the city commission and say, you know, I need this heard by a certain time, or can you please be specific about when my application is going to be heard? That those are things to consider, or how they'd like to move forward with the application.
Thank you. Any other?
And we'd also, I just want to say on the record, we're also happy to provide additional notification when the plat comes, if it does come in front of the Planning Commission again. So not only notification for the City Commission level, we will happily do additional notification when the plat comes in front of this body again. Because actually the way platting requirements are, only the developer who's primarily property owner in that third portion of the plat and the municipal golf course fall within the notification range. So we will continue to extend that notification range to the entire subdivision.
Thank you. Okay, any last-minute comments? Then can I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
Merry Christmas.
Seconded.
Second, yeah.
Meeting adjourned.
Motion to adjourn?
Yeah.
Motion to adjourn.
Dan Bethel.
And second? Yeah. Oh, no. Olson.
Kind of stiff.